I was elbow-deep in a bag of feed when I heard the knock. Not a friendly knock either, more like someone trying to break through the front door with sheer attitude. I opened it and, of course, there stood Rosemary Keller, the HOA president, in her signature floral blouse, clipboard in hand, and her nose tilted like she was smelling expired milk. "Gregory Klein," she said, dragging my name out like it offended her tongue. "We need to talk about your chickens." I glanced toward the side yard where my hens pecked cheerfully in their coop. "What about them?" "They're a nuisance. The noise. The smell. Several residents have complained." "Funny," I said. "I've had 5 different neighbors stop by to say they love the fresh eggs." She narrowed her eyes. "The HOA bylaws prohibit disruptive animals. They're hens, not roosters. They barely make a sound. They cluck," she snapped. "At 6 in the morning. That's disruptive." I leaned against the doorframe, not budging. "Show me where in the bylaws it says hens aren't allowed." Rosemary flipped through her clipboard like it was the Constitution. "It's under Section 14, subsection C, no livestock or poultry shall be kept except with prior written approval." "I got that approval 2 years ago." She blinked. "From who?" "From Carl, the president before you. He signed off on it. I've got the emails and the form." Her mouth twitched like she bit into a lemon. "Well, I'm the president now and I'm revoking it. You have 72 hours to remove the chickens or face a daily fine." "Not happening," I said flatly. "You'll be hearing from the board," she said, already turning on her heel. I watched her march down my driveway like she was storming Normandy. The moment she left, I went inside and pulled up my files. Sure enough, there it was, Carl's signed approval, time-stamped and backed by board minutes. But I knew Rosemary wouldn't care. She didn't want peace, she wanted control. 3 days later, true to her threat, I got a formal notice from the HOA. Chickens must be removed. Daily fine of $200 to begin immediately. I wasn't about to roll over. I'd lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, paid my dues, helped build the community garden, volunteered at clean-up days. And now this woman shows up, rewrites the rules, and expects everyone to bow? No way. So I made a call. Not to a lawyer. Not to the board. I called Mayor Ronald Haskins. He owed me a favor. Back when he was running for city council, I'd helped organize a town hall meeting that got him the votes he needed. And more importantly, I knew something Rosemary didn't. Our neighborhood wasn't officially zoned as a livestock-restricted area. The HOA had drafted their own noise rules, but they weren't legally enforceable without city approval. "Greg," the mayor boomed through the phone. "Still got those golden egg layers?" "Sure do," I said. "You busy this Saturday? I've got fresh eggs, coffee, and a front row seat to the HOA circus." He laughed. "Count me in." Saturday morning, I set up chairs in the front yard and laid out a small breakfast spread. A few neighbors wandered over once they saw the mayor's car pull up. Rosemary arrived 10 minutes later, dressed like she was attending a country club brunch. She stopped cold when she saw him. "Mayor Haskins," she said, blinking rapidly. "What a surprise." He smiled. "Morning, Rosemary. Greg invited me. Said there was a noise complaint worth hearing about." Her face turned a shade redder than the cherry tomatoes in my garden. "This is a private HOA matter." "Actually," he said, "it concerns city zoning. I brought someone from the zoning board with me." Another man stepped out of the car, holding a clipboard. Rosemary's clipboard suddenly looked more like a grocery list. I leaned back in my lawn chair, sipped my coffee, and said, "Let the hearing begin." Mayor Haskins stepped up onto the small wooden platform I'd built for my daughter's old lemonade stand, now repurposed as our makeshift forum stage. The zoning official, a wiry man with thinning hair and a badge clipped to his shirt pocket that read David Yulee Senior City Planner, adjusted his glasses and pulled out a folded parcel map. "Thanks for coming out this morning," the mayor began, his voice carrying easily across the yard where nearly 24 neighbors had gathered, drawn by the chance to see something more entertaining than daytime TV. "We're here to clear up some confusion about animal ordinances and whether this community's HOA has the authority to enforce noise complaints that fall outside city code." Rosemary stood off to the side, rigid like someone trying not to blink during a staring contest. Her vice president, Marvin Lutz, hovered behind her, his arms crossed and his face set like wet cement. David opened his folder. This neighborhood Maple Ridge is zoned as R3, which allows for limited residential agriculture. That includes up to 6 hens per home, provided they're housed properly and don't create excessive disturbance. Rosemary stepped forward, her voice sharp. With all due respect, the HOA has established its own bylaws to preserve the peace of the neighborhood. We have the right to restrict livestock. David didn't bother looking up. You can't override city zoning without a variance signed by the council, which you don't have. And the city defines livestock differently than your documents do. Hens for personal egg production don't count unless they're being bred or sold commercially. Marvin muttered something under his breath, but David continued, flipping a page. Also, your noise rule is unenforceable unless it aligns with municipal noise ordinances. I reviewed your document. It references decibel thresholds that aren't consistent with our standards. In short, your noise policy has no legal standing. A murmur spread through the crowd. Some people nodded. Others whispered. A woman from across the street, Diane, raised her hand and asked, "So, if the HOA fines us for something the city doesn't regulate, is that even legal?" The mayor answered, "Only if it's explicitly authorized in the CC and RS and doesn't conflict with city code. Otherwise, it's not just unenforceable, it could be challenged as fraudulent billing." Rosemary's jaw tightened. "We're simply trying to maintain a certain standard of living." "Your manufacturing authority," I said. "That's not the same thing." She turned toward me, her expression cold. "You've been looking for a fight since I took office." I didn't bother pretending. "No, I've been looking for you to follow the rules like the rest of us." Before she could reply, David closed his folder and looked directly at her. "There's another issue. I found a recent amendment to your bylaws filed with the county. It includes a clause that levies fines exceeding the statutory daily maximum. That's a violation of state HOA regulations, specifically the Davis-Sterling Act." "Those amendments were voted on," Marvin said. "By whom?" David asked. "The last meeting minutes you submitted to the city show 4 board members voted. That's not a quorum." The mayor turned to Rosemary. "Did you alter the bylaws without a full board vote?" She hesitated. "We assumed the authority was implicit in the executive committee." "That's not how that works," David replied. "And submitting falsified amendments to the county is considered administrative fraud." A low whistle came from someone near the back. Rosemary's face flushed, but not from heat. The mayor wasn't finished. "Greg told me something else. That you've been issuing fines without providing itemized breakdowns or appeal options." "That's standard policy," Marvin said. "No, it's a violation of Civil Code Section 4925, David said. "You're required to give residents 10 days to correct an alleged violation and provide a hearing option before issuing a fine." Another neighbor, Luis, raised his voice from the crowd. "I got a $200 fine last month for inappropriate landscaping. No notice, no hearing. Just a bill." A woman next to him added, "They said my son's skateboard ramp violated aesthetic conformity. We built it behind the garage." The mayor crossed his arms. "Sounds like we need a full audit of Maple Ridge HOA's practices." Rosemary's eyes flicked toward Marvin, but he was already stepping back, distancing himself like a man watching a ship he knows is going down. David pulled out a second document. "I've already submitted a request to the Department of Real Estate for a compliance review. If they find irregularities, the board could face sanctions and any improperly collected fines will need to be refunded." The crowd erupted in claps and cheers. Nothing wild, just the kind of applause that comes when people realize they're not crazy and someone's finally listening. Rosemary didn't say a word. She just turned and walked toward her golf cart, her heels crunching the gravel like it had personally offended her. I stood and addressed the neighbors. "There's still work to do. We'll need to elect a new board if this one's found in violation. But the first step is transparency." Luis stepped forward. "I'll help organize a recall." Diane nodded. "Count me in." The mayor turned to me with a grin. "Well, Greg, I came for coffee and eggs. Didn't expect to watch a regime collapse." "You know how it is," I said. "Chickens first, then the palace walls." He laughed. "You ever think about running for the board?" "I'd rather clean coop straw," I said. But I wasn't joking entirely. Something had shifted that morning. Not just in the rules, but in the people. The fear was gone. And in its place, a spark. Back inside, I opened my laptop and began drafting a petition for a special meeting. 10 signatures was all it would take. I already had twice that. As I typed, I could see the hens pecking near the fence, calm and steady, oblivious to the storm they'd helped weather. I didn't need to tell them. They already knew. Order had a funny way of reasserting itself. Sometimes it started with a rooster. Other times with a clipboard. But every now and then it started with a neighbor who decided enough was enough. By the following Wednesday, the HOA board was officially under investigation, and the air in Maple Ridge felt different, lighter somehow, like collective tension had finally begun to unravel. But even as neighbors were rallying and signatures for the special meeting piled up, something didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just vindication I felt. It was suspicion. I'd spent the last week combing through public records, HOA filings, and board meeting transcripts. Not because I didn't trust the city's investigation, but because I had a gut feeling that Rosemary's obsession with control wasn't just about chickens or noise. Something about how quickly she escalated things, how confidently she wielded authority that didn't belong to her. It didn't smell like garden variety HOA overreach. It smelled like something worse. So I kept digging. Late Thursday night, I found it. Buried in the county's property records was a recent amendment, a quiet reclassification of the neighborhood's common use plot, what we all knew as the community garden and adjoining green space. It had been filed under a commercial use variance. Not only that, but the listed applicant was a shell company, Ridgeway Holdings, LLC. I cross-checked the LLC with the state's business registry. It was registered out of a P.O. box in the same zip code. The registered agent? Marvin Lutz. I stared at the screen, heart thudding. They weren't just making up rules to harass residents, they were maneuvering to sell off community land. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Diane, who'd been cataloging documentation for the recall. The second was to the city assessor's office. The third was to Detective Ray Norris, a former colleague from my brief stint in code enforcement, now working white-collar crime for the county sheriff's department. By noon, Detective Norris was standing in my kitchen, his badge tucked into his belt, flipping through the printed documents I'd compiled. "You're telling me," he said, turning a page, "they filed for a zoning change on common-use land without public notice?" I nodded. "Used an LLC to hide the buyer's identity. The signature on the amendment belongs to Rosemary Keller." He looked up. "That's fraudulent conveyance, if proven. And if funds changed hands or there's a pending sale." "There's a survey crew scheduled for Monday," I said. "I saw the markers this morning. They're trying to subdivide it." He tapped the papers. "I'll need the original filings and any emails you've got." If this was coordinated in secret and they bypassed the required 2/3 neighborhood vote, it's actionable. I handed him a flash drive. "Everything's on there, including a recorded phone call." He raised an eyebrow. "You recorded them?" "Last week. Marvin came by trying to smooth things over. He slipped up." He clicked the drive into his laptop, slipped on headphones, and listened. After a minute, he paused it and looked at me. He admitted Rosemary used her role to fast-track the variance? Not in so many words. But he said, and I quote, "It'll be worth it once the contractors start cutting checks." He unplugged the drive. "That'll do for a warrant." By Friday evening, news spread like brush fire. A sheriff's office vehicle parked outside the HOA office, and 2 deputies entered with a search warrant. They came out with boxes of files, hard drives, and a laptop. Rosemary's house went dark that night. No porch light, no movement. Marvin's car vanished from the driveway by morning. Saturday dawned with the kind of silence you only notice after a storm. And then, just before lunch, a knock came at the door. For once, it wasn't hostile. Luis stood there holding a folder. "We hit the signature threshold," he said. "Special meetings on Tuesday. We're going to vote them out." "Good," I said. "But we're not done." He followed me to the garage, where I opened a file cabinet and pulled out a binder. "This is everything I've got on historical use of that green space. Old flyers, event photos, even the founding declaration. That land was never meant to be privatized." He flipped through the pages, then stopped. "Greg. This one's signed." "Yeah." by the original developer, dedicating that land to community use in perpetuity. Luis whistled low. So even if they got the variance, they couldn't legally sell it? We brought the binder to the city council office on Monday morning. The city planner's office confirmed the document's validity and flagged the commercial variance for revocation. The sale, if there was one pending, was now dead. That night, my phone rang. It was Detective Norris. They tried to wire funds to a construction firm in Temecula, he said. $500,000 down payment. We froze the account. Looks like Ridgeway Holdings was a front to siphon HOA fees into private hands. Charges? Pending. But we're looking at embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud a community trust. I hung up and just sat there for a moment, staring at the coop through the window. The hens were calm, unbothered as always, scratching in the dirt like the world hadn't almost been sold out from under them. Tuesday night, the community center was packed. Folding chairs lined every inch of the room, people standing shoulder to shoulder. The vote didn't take long. 92 residents cast ballots. 90 voted to remove the board. 2 abstained. No one voted to keep them. Diane was elected interim president unanimously. As she stepped up to the mic, she didn't gloat. She didn't crow. She said one thing: we're rebuilding. Together. Applause followed, but it wasn't loud. It was steady. Grounded. Like something real had finally been restored. After the meeting, I walked out into the cool night air. The moon was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows over the empty streets. I passed Marvin's house, still dark, blinds drawn, and kept moving. Back home, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, not because I needed the caffeine, but because I learned something about patience. About watching. Listening. It had started with a petty complaint. A noise rule no one respected. A clipboard full of empty authority. But underneath it had been something far worse, a plan to gut the community from the inside out. And all it took to stop it was a few chickens, a few emails, and a neighborhood willing to stand up instead of step aside. The law had its wheels, slow but precise. And once they started turning, they didn't stop. I looked out at the quiet street and thought about what came next. Not just for me. For all of us. The board was gone. The land was safe. And the hens? They were already roosting. Just as they should be. The sun was just starting to rise when I got the call, an unfamiliar number that turned out to be a clerk from the county prosecutor's office. She was brief, efficient, and polite in the way people are when they're used to delivering serious news without emotional involvement. Mr. Klein, I'm calling to inform you that formal charges have been filed in Superior Court against Rosemary Keller and Marvin Lutz. The case has been assigned to Judge Helen Marino. You may be asked to testify if needed. I thanked her, hung up, and sat still for a moment, phone resting on my knee, not moving. Not because I was surprised I wasn't, but because the weight of it finally sunk in. This wasn't just a messy HOA scandal anymore. This had teeth. I stepped outside and walked the length of my property, not to inspect anything but to think. The morning air carried a chill, but the sky was clear, and the hens were already scratching under the fig tree, unaware that they'd unintentionally exposed a criminal conspiracy. 2 hours later, Diane stopped by with a sealed envelope from the new board. It was a formal request for me to serve as a community liaison during the transition period, helping residents file appeals, review past violations, and assist in coordinating with the city's oversight committee. I hadn't expected that, but I gave her a nod and told her I'd consider it. I know you didn't do this for recognition, she said, handing over the envelope. But we need someone who knows what buried corruption looks like. I'd rather be digging compost than paperwork, I muttered. But I took the envelope anyway. Later that week, the city held a public transparency forum, a new policy spearheaded by the mayor's office in response to the Maple Ridge scandal. I was invited to speak, alongside the city planner and a legal analyst from the state's Department of Real Estate. It was surreal, standing at a podium in front of a packed auditorium, not just neighbors but residents from other communities who'd heard about what happened and wanted to know how to protect themselves. I told them the truth, that it started with a clipboard and a demand and ended with a criminal investigation because people refused to be intimidated. When the forum ended, I was approached by a man in his 60s wearing a faded veteran's cap and a jacket stitched with a local plumbing company's logo. He introduced himself as Donnie, a board member from a neighborhood across town. "We've got a Rosemary too," he said. "Only ours drives a Lexus and thinks she's above state law." "How do you even begin pushing back?" "You don't start by fighting," I told him. "You start by watching. They always tell on themselves eventually." That evening, back in Maple Ridge, the community center was holding its first fully open board meeting in over a year. No closed doors. No surprise amendments. Every resident received a printed agenda ahead of time. I took a seat in the back, content to listen while Diane read through a proposal to establish a bylaw review committee. Then something unexpected happened. Ray Norris, the detective, walked in wearing plain clothes but his badge still clipped to his belt. He waited until the public comment section and stepped up to the microphone. "I've just come from the courthouse," he said. "The judge approved a temporary injunction freezing all HOA-controlled accounts pending the outcome of the investigation. A forensic audit has been ordered. If you've paid fines in the last 6 months, especially for violations that were never documented properly, you'll be contacted by the restitution office." A few gasps rippled through the crowd, but no one panicked. People just nodded as if they'd already made peace with the truth and were ready for the cleanup. Ray continued. "The most serious charge involves the unauthorized conversion of community property and the attempted wire fraud connected to that. The DA's office has requested that any communications, emails, letters, even handwritten notes from the previous board be turned over. They're building a timeline." Diane thanked him, and as he turned to leave, he caught my eye and gave a small nod, not of victory, but of acknowledgement. After the meeting, I stayed behind to help fold chairs and gather leftover flyers. A few neighbors stuck around too, talking quietly as they packed up. No one was angry anymore. No one was afraid. It was like someone had opened a window that had been nailed shut for years and the air finally moved again. The next morning, I drove down to the city permit office. I wasn't there for another complaint. I was there to file a request to turn the old green space, the one that had nearly been sold out from under us, into a permanent conservation easement. Not just protected, but untouchable. The city planner said it would take a few weeks, but with the documentation I'd brought, she didn't see any reason it wouldn't go through. By the following month, the new board had launched a complete overhaul of the HOA's operating procedures. They abolished the vague, aesthetic conformity clause that had been used to justify arbitrary citations, replaced it with specific, measurable standards, and created a community review panel where residents could appeal decisions without fear of retaliation. They also voted unanimously to eliminate the noise ordinance that Rosemary had tried to enforce. It was replaced with a policy that aligned with city code: no more, no less. Reasonable, fair, legal. And just like that, the chickens were no longer rebels. They were just chickens again. One afternoon, as I was cleaning out the coop, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. I turned to see Mayor Haskins stepping out, holding a small bag of seed in one hand and a rolled-up newspaper in the other. "Thought you might like this," he said, handing me the paper. The headline read, "Former HOA President Indicted in Land Fraud Scheme." I took it, glanced at the photo of Rosemary being led out of her house in cuffs, and handed it back to him. "I've seen enough," he chuckled. "You ever consider running for city council? Not unless it comes with a chicken stipend." We sat on the porch for a while, watching as one of the hens strutted across the lawn like she owned the place. And honestly, maybe she did. Maybe they all did. They'd earned it. Later that week, the conservation easement was approved. The land was now permanently protected by city ordinance. No board, developer, or corporate shell could ever touch it again. The neighborhood threw a small celebration, nothing fancy. Just picnic tables, homemade lemonade, and a few kids running around with chalk. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else passed out flyers for a new community composting initiative. I stood off to the side, watching as people laughed, shared stories, and talked about planting wildflowers in the protected field. It was the kind of thing that would have been shut down 6 months ago with a citation and a threat. But now it was just life. And that's the thing about justice. It doesn't always show up with sirens or headlines. Sometimes it comes quietly, like a hen laying an egg at dawn, unnoticed by most, but vital all the same. The coup stayed. The board changed. The land was safe. And as for Rosemary and Marvin, they'd be explaining themselves to a judge for a very long time. Maple Ridge wasn't perfect. No place ever is. But it was finally back in the hands of the people who lived there. And that made all the difference.